Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
Halloween, a time for face paint, sugar highs, and maybe a few jump scares. But in the late 70s and on through the 80s in Detroit, Michigan, there was something else to fear. Something darker. Something that turned mischief into malice. The night before Halloween has long been called Mischief Night across cultures, a night of harmless pranks and teenage chaos. But mischief has a way of mutating when the mischievous are angry. And in Detroit, they were furious. That anger was fed by economic collapse, police brutality, and the slow death of a once mighty industrial giant. The city's foundations were crumbling under corruption and neglect, and in those cracks, darkness took root. The playful pranks of Mischief Night began to evolve into fire, fury, and destruction. Detroit's most disillusioned residents looked at egging cars and toilet papering houses and said, "That's cute, hold my Molotov." What followed turned the city into an apocalyptic landscape as the sky lit up for 3 nights straight with felonious fire setting. Neighbors feared for their lives as their city burned around them. Others cheered from the shadows, celebrating the chaos. Local news stations ran live tickers in the corner of the screen, counting up the number of structure fires, as exhausted, underfunded fire crews fought desperately to gain control. But for every blaze they extinguished, 2 more ignited. They called it Devil's Night, a night when evil walked and every Detroit resident stayed on edge. Families took to their rooftops with garden hoses and thermoses of coffee, determined to defend their homes from miscreants with matchbooks. And when the devil's soldiers escalated, when over 800 structure fires tore through Detroit in one Halloween, its citizens did what leadership hadn't. They fought back. A war ignited between those who sought destruction and those who refused to surrender. But what led evil to walk Detroit's streets in the first place? How did a city once hailed as the heart of American industry become the playground of arsonists? A hotspot for thrill seekers drawn to the glow of burning neighborhoods. This is the story of how mischief mutated, of how politics, racism, and corruption stripped Detroit to its bones until some believed the only answer was fire. But it's also a story of redemption, of a community that rose from the ashes, reclaimed its streets, and fought back against the devil's hand. Because today the devil no longer walks Detroit unchallenged on the eve of Halloween. His night has been reclaimed. This is Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and unapologetic hoarder of the Halloween candy.
And I'm the heat that makes the devil sweat.
First, a special thanks to our Patreon subscribers for their support. 2 weeks ago, I was worried that I mispronounced Laura's last name, and yep, I sure did. So to Laura Pichota, thank you so much for your support. And to all of you who have joined as initiates, indoctrinated, and Inner Sanctum members, we are so grateful to have you. You can join the anointed few at Steve's Sacred Snack Table and get your episodes ad-free by checking the show notes for our Patreon link. Also, a big shout out to Natasha Stark for leaving us an entire boatload full of comments on Spotify this week. That kind of interaction helps us find new listeners, so feel free to join Natasha in leaving comments or drop a 5-star rating or written review where you're listening right now.
Send throat lozenges.
Yeah. You can also follow us on X, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Every like, comment, and share helps us grow, and we are genuinely thankful for each of you who take the time to do that. And one last note before we get started. If you haven't checked out the You Should Be Here podcast, please do. You Should Be Here is a podcaster's give back collaboration that is 100% free for the listeners, and all of the proceeds generated from ads go directly to victims' relief charities, and every episode was donated by the participating podcasters. We're honored to be part of Season 4 of You Should Be Here. This series is called Cases That Haunt Us. The full season is out now, perfect for a true crime binge session. You'll hear some of the best creators in the genre coming together to help victims and their families, and yes, Crime to Burn donated 2 episodes to that series. So go check it out, and don't forget to leave a 5-star rating while you're there. I will leave a link in the show notes, and a special thanks to Jules Thorpe of Fire Eyes Media for her hard work in pulling that series together. And now we must return to Detroit, and a time of lawless rebellion. The night before Halloween, Devil's Night. It's believed that Devil's Night was born out of a far more innocuous tradition, Mischief Night, which traces its roots back to 18th century England. Early accounts of Mischief Night were originally tied to May Day celebrations, marked by so-called harmless pranks like tipping over carts. And I suppose whether or not that's harmless depends on whether it was your cart that got tipped and whether it was full of ale or manure. Over time, the tradition shifted from May Day to the night before Guy Fawkes Night in early November. When European settlers came to America, they brought the traditions of Mischief Night with them. But since Guy Fawkes isn't exactly on the US holiday calendar, the mischief migrated, reassigned to Halloween Eve, because nothing goes with costumes and candy like a cultural excuse for vandalism. Across the country, it took on different local personalities. In many regions, it stayed Mischief Night. But in parts of New England, it became Cabbage Night, where pranksters tossed cabbages at houses. It's like if Instacart suddenly got very aggressive about delivering your fiber-rich foods. Other areas called it Goosey Night, which the internet says usually involved ding-dong ditch and TPing yards and soaping windows. And in the Midwest and parts of the Northeast, pranksters took to removing gates from their hinges, earning the night yet another name, Gate Night.
They're just taking people's gates off the hinge.
Yeah.
They leave the gate there, and they just take it off the...
It didn't say where they put them.
Yeah, take this. Your gate is now off its hinges. Mischief has occurred. Ha 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 ha. Until next time.
Over time, those harmless pranks escalated. In some areas, the night devolved into petty crime, including vandalism, broken windows, and the occasional mailbox casualty. But in a few corners of the United States, the mischief went way off script, crossing straight into felony territory. It seems some arsonists identified the missing ingredient in Mischief Night's recipe, a nice bonfire. Only instead of gathering around a fire pit, they seem to prefer the less traditional locations for their flaming festivities. Nothing says neighborhood bonding like roasting marshmallows over a Buick. And Detroit wasn't alone in this more arsony interpretation of Mischief Night. Cities like Camden, New Jersey, and Cincinnati also saw spikes in Halloween season fires. But in Detroit, it became something else entirely, a ritual. A night where the city burned not by accident and not by chance, but by tradition. It's widely believed that Detroit's local media first coined the term Devil's Night, and honestly, it fits.
Construction workers loved it. Insurance companies hated it.
Because by the late 70s, it really did look like evil itself had taken a stroll through Detroit's streets while the city burned behind it. And in Detroit, the devil did not walk alone. He had legions of firebugs who treated the mayhem like a matinee, cheering each time a new building lit up like a torch. Some even booed the firefighters, like they were rooting for the destruction of their own city. And maybe in a way, that's exactly what they were doing. In 1984, the problem reached absolutely epic proportions. A record 810 structure fires over a 3-day period beginning on October 29th and culminating in mind-boggling destruction by the time dawn broke on November 1st.
That are organized in some way? Burning down like 800 houses.
And I don't think they were organized. I mean, there was groups of people that were doing it.
That's just a grassroots movement.
Yeah, it was a grassroots arson movement. And by that point, I don't think it was just Detroit citizens either. There was reports of people coming from other countries to witness Devil's Night in Detroit. From Canada, and even one group reportedly showed up from Japan.
Well, from Canada, I mean, that's not far away.
That's not that far from Detroit, but Japan? Apparently, Japan's at news cruise, even, to Devil's Night in the 80s.
Well, yeah, have you seen their game shows? They'll watch anything.
Well, I've only seen, like, the shows that are so bad they've made it onto the internet. I imagine that the more normal shows wouldn't be interesting, so they don't make it into the U.S. internet. And it's just like, they probably see, like, the most ridiculous clips of the Kardashians and think that's American TV, so...
We don't really have. What are you going to show them? The Simpsons? Family Guy? South Park?
South Park. But why would citizens of Detroit burn their own city? How did we get here? And how bad does the corruption have to rot a city before people start believing the only answer is redemption by fire? To answer that, we have to step backwards. Before the riots, before Devil's Night, to a time when the city was the crown jewel of American industry. The Motor City wasn't always burning. In the 1950s, Detroit was booming. It was the fourth largest city in America, home to nearly 2 million people and a thriving middle class. The auto industry didn't just build cars, it built dreams. You could graduate high school, walk into a Ford or GM plant, and earn a wage that bought you a house, a car, and an annual vacation. Detroit was proof that the American dream could be assembled on a factory line. But by the early 1960s, those assembly lines started to slow, and so did the city's heartbeat. Automation, outsourcing, and suburban flight began siphoning jobs and families out of the city limits. What was left behind were hollowed-out neighborhoods, a shrinking tax base, and growing resentment. Black residents, who had long been denied access to better jobs and housing, were crammed into overcrowded, neglected districts. Police brutality was rampant, and discrimination was baked into the very structure of the city. Redlining, an official practice of denying home loans and mortgages to black families, kept generational wealth out of reach. So while downtown skyscrapers glittered, right down the street, entire neighborhoods crumbled under systemic neglect. And in that divide, anger seeped. By 1967, that anger would ignite, not from a Molotov cocktail, but from decades of pressure, corruption, and inequality waiting for a spark. That spark came on a sweltering July night when Detroit police raided an unlicensed after-hours bar known as a Blind Pig.
Like that was the name of the bar?
No, I'm going to tell you what it is. Now, the term Blind Pig actually dates back to Prohibition, when you would pay a fee to see some oddity, like a one-eyed hog, and in return, they would give you an illegal drink. You were actually paying for the oddity. You just happened to get a drink. You came for the pig, you stayed for the gin. And the name stuck long after the pigs sobered up. It became a term used to refer to a club operating without a proper liquor license.
What was it? A pig swiller? What was it called?
A blind pig.
A blind pig.
It was July 23, 1967, at the corner of 12th Street and Claremont. Inside the club, neighbors were celebrating the return of 2 black veterans from Vietnam. Detroit PD decided to crash the party, expecting a handful of stragglers like any other night. Instead, they found a full-blown homecoming. The Detroit police of the 1960s were, let's say, not known for their warmth or cultural sensitivity. The predominantly white force had a well-earned reputation for racial profiling and extreme brutality in those black neighborhoods. So when officers stormed the club, the confrontation between that massive crowd and the handful of cops escalated faster than a political joke at the Thanksgiving dinner table. To many residents, it felt like just another example of racially targeted policing. But this time, they'd had enough. Fueled by outrage and maybe a bit of liquid courage, they fought back. Bottles and rocks flew as police arrested 82 people. But the unrest did not stop there. Soon, patrol cars were being overturned, and within hours, the tension had spread through the city like wildfire. Over the next 5 days, Detroit burned. 43 people were killed. More than 1,000 were injured, and a staggering 7,200 people were arrested. Over 2,000 buildings were destroyed. The National Guard rolled in to restore order, but the truth is, the damage was already decades deep. The riot didn't start the fire, it just exposed how long the city had been burning from the inside out.
It was always burning.
Since the world's been turning. The deepest wounds weren't the charred buildings, they were the decades of inequality that had set the city up to explode. Even before the auto industry began to crumble, black families had been boxed out of opportunity through a process called redlining. The federal government, through the Homeowners Loans Corporation and later the FHA, created color-coded maps rating neighborhoods by the investment risk. Areas with large black populations were shaded red and labeled hazardous investment risks. That single outline condemned them to economic starvation. Banks would refuse to issue mortgages, and insurance companies would refuse policies in those neighborhoods, even when the families were creditworthy. Meanwhile, white neighborhoods got low-interest, federally backed loans and shiny new subdivisions complete with lawns and generational wealth. In those redlined areas, Landlords couldn't use their properties as collateral to get financing to repair those properties, so entire neighborhoods began to decay. The divide between Detroit's affluent suburbs and its poorest inner-city districts deepened year after year. Now, redlining was eventually outlawed by the Fair Housing Act in 1968, but by then, the damage was irreversible. Decades of stolen wealth-building opportunities left scars that are still visible today. Even today, in 2025, those neighborhoods that have been redlined still have lower property values, higher poverty rates, and yes, a higher fire risk. And then you layer on top of that the collapse of Detroit's auto industry. Between 1947 and 1977, the city lost nearly half of its manufacturing jobs, and the people with money, mostly white and mostly suburban bound, packed up and left. The city's tax base collapsed, infrastructure decayed, and resentment grew like weeds in the cracks of a forgotten sidewalk. The result? A gutted economy, collapsing infrastructure, and neighborhoods left to rot. By the mid-60s, Detroit was already a powder keg, packed with frustration, inequality, and gasoline-soaked hopelessness. The police alone didn't light the fuse that night on 12th and Claremont. They just happened to be holding the match. 5 days later, the city would never be the same. Detroit could rebuild the burned-out buildings, but the trust, that was beyond repair. And as the last embers of the 1967 riots finally faded, Detroit found itself cracked wide open. The divide in the city wasn't subtle anymore, it was a gaping wound. Those middle and upper-class families who had stayed through the economic downturn no longer felt safe in the wake of the chaos of the riots, and they packed their station wagons, clutching their savings and their pearls, and fled for the suburbs. What was left of the city's tax base evaporated, small businesses shuttered, and the weight of abandonment began to buckle what few city services remained. And into that vacuum stepped Coleman A. Young, Detroit's first black mayor, elected in 1973. Hope swelled. His election felt like a long overdue course correction, a chance to rebuild, reform, and reclaim the city's spirit. And Young didn't waste time. He immediately took on police reform, dismantling the notoriously brutal STRESS unit. STRESS stood for Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets.
That's an odd acronym to choose. Let's definitely not de-escalate.
A plainclothes squad responsible for dozens of death and police brutality in Detroit's black neighborhoods. With their profiling tactics, the black community didn't see the STRESS unit as bringing safety. They saw it as city-sanctioned terror.
They were bringing stress, because it says right on the package, right?
And Coleman called it what it was, a symbol of everything wrong with policing in this city, and he eliminated it in 1974. It was a necessary move, but like most surgery, it came with bleeding. The department fractured. Response times grew longer. Budgets shrank. And those cuts didn't stop with the police. Fire department budgets started drying up like a neglected houseplant. Publicly, Young was the face of reform, fiery, confident, and promising revival. But behind the facade, corruption was spreading through the city's arteries like a cancer under Young's leadership. City contracts turned into personal favors. Kickbacks and mismanagement drained city coffers dry. Every year, Detroit's fire crews were asked to do more with less. Less water pressure from unmaintained water lines, fewer firefighters from understaffed units, and trucks that were so old and falling apart that they would have been better in a museum. Some rigs rolled to calls held together with duct tape and bungee cords. Others broke down en route, leaving firefighters to sprint the final blocks carrying whatever gear they could manage. Meanwhile, the city's aging housing stock turned from homes into hazards. Aging wiring sparked fires in century-old buildings, and residents trying to stay warm in winter resorted to dangerous improvised heating. As unemployment soared through the 80s, whole neighborhoods emptied, leaving behind hollowed-out streets, shattered windows, and block after block of abandoned buildings, kindling in the eyes of an arsonist. Detroit had all the ingredients for ritualized infernos. The city may have survived the riots, but the neglect was building a ritual pyre, and soon the devil would declare it his playground. At first, the fires came quietly, a few suspicious blazes in vacant buildings, a flicker here, a glow there. But every October, that flicker would grow brighter. Detroit was sitting on a mountain of kindling, abandoned houses surrounded by dry, unkept yards. It was a city that was seething with anger that had nowhere left to go. And as Halloween approached, that anger found its outlet in fire. The night before Halloween had always been mischief night, pranks, vandalism, a little chaos. But in Detroit, that chaos was getting an upgrade. Egging houses and soaping windows loses its thrill when your neighborhood is collapsing under the weight of neglect. When every block is pockmarked with abandoned homes and businesses slowly caving in on themselves. By the late 1970s, the fires weren't random anymore, they were expected. Most of the targets were abandoned buildings, bandos, as some people started calling them, but not all of them. For some, it was rebellion, an echo of the rage that had only been given a brief voice during the riots of '67. But for many landlords, trapped in a forest of decay and plummeting property values, the fires became an economic escape, an insurance payout dressed up as vandalism, a convenient fix to an unsellable problem. And for too many others, it was just entertainment. Neighborhoods turned into theaters of flame. People gathered on porches watching the skyline burn like it was a sporting event. Local news aired live footage tallying fire calls in the corner of the screen like a scoreboard. And every year the numbers climbed, a few dozen, then hundreds. And by 1984, Devil's Night had become more than a tradition. It was a ritual of destruction. 3 nights of chaos, October 29th through the 31st, left 810 structure fires in their wake. Other cities hosted haunted houses, but Detroit, haunted by racism, poverty, and decades of disparity, had no need for such childish trappings. Detroit hosted an inferno. Families stood guard on rooftops with garden hoses and flashlights, sipping coffee from thermoses to stay awake, waiting for shadows in the dark, ready to defend their homes, their families, and their sanity. Firefighters worked around the clock with skeleton crews and failing equipment. The city burned while sirens wailed through the night, a constant reminder that Detroit had allowed evil to grow unchecked within City Hall. Evil paved the streets like a red carpet, welcoming the devil, and the devil was right on schedule. And with the devil came the people. At first, it was just reporters sharing the city's outrage, trying to make sense of the chaos. But soon others followed, from neighboring towns, from neighboring states, and eventually from across an ocean. They came to see Detroit burn, to chase fire trucks through the dark streets and watch the skyline transform in real time as flames painted the horizon and smoke crowned the city like a curse. They came to pay homage to the place where arson had become ritual, where the people worshipped with matches and gasoline, where outrage itself ignited. The fires had become an annual event, Detroit's own macabre countdown to Halloween. And every year, city leaders scrambled for a fix. They tried curfews, press conferences, and public pleas. They tried praying, they tried scolding. But the devil didn't take his notes at City Hall. So the measures grew more desperate and, quite honestly, absurd. By the mid-1980s, gas stations were banned from selling fuel after dark in the days leading up to Halloween. An entire city so flammable that buying gas became suspicious behavior. And don't even think about filling a gas can. That was strictly prohibited for weeks before Halloween. Grocery stores quietly pulled lighter fluid and charcoal starter off the shelves. Hardware stores hid matches behind the counter like contraband. The city even tried to beat the devil with broadcast television. HBO offered free premium programming around Halloween in Detroit. Yes, free HBO. Hoping to encourage people to stay home mesmerized by cable instead of kindling.
Okay, how did they orchestrate that?
I didn't dig into it.
That's something.
Right?
I want to see the hands that shook, right?
Lawmakers called it community engagement. And trick-or-treating? It was pushed earlier and earlier each year as curfews stretched from dusk till dawn. Kids were collecting candy under a 4 p.m. sun in a city that didn't trust them once night fell. Police patrolled neighborhoods with their lights flashing, a warning, not a comfort. Every siren that rose in the distance was another address swallowed by the flames. The city had become a place where curfews replaced candy, and fear replaced faith. But you can't legislate away what was haunting Detroit. because you can't outlaw despair. And Detroit's despair had been burning for a long, long time. The truth was, no ordinance or gas ban could stop it, because the fires weren't really about Halloween. They were about power, about visibility, about a city screaming to be seen. And when the devil finally overplayed his hand, it wasn't the lawmakers who answered. It was the people. Because in the heart of the fire, something else was smoldering, something that refused to die. Hope. And in Detroit, hope had always been hard to kill. After years of watching their city burn, Detroiters decided they weren't going to let the devil have his night anymore. Residents, business owners, parents, teenagers, they stepped out of their homes, not with matches but with flashlights. They formed neighborhood patrols, armed with radios and cell phones and coffee instead of gasoline. Thousands of volunteers took to the streets each October, standing guard on porches and street corners, keeping watch. They called it Angels' Night. And it worked. In 1984, there were more than 800 fires, but by the late 1990s, that number had fallen to fewer than 100.
101 night is too many.
Well, we're going to talk about the problems that persist. Over time, the tradition of destruction became a tradition of protection. Parents even brought their kids out to help patrol, and local businesses began donating supplies. The mayor's office organized citywide volunteer efforts. The same city, once infamous for its infernos, had turned its own story onto its head. Detroit, the city that nearly burned itself to death, had resurrected itself with watchful eyes and willing hands. And by 2018, Angels' Night patrols officially ended, not because the city gave up, but because it no longer needed them. The devil had been exorcised from Detroit's streets, and the people had become the angels that they were waiting for. But Detroit's problems were far from over. After Coleman Young's administration came Kwame Kilpatrick, another mayor whose name would become synonymous with scandal, embezzlement, perjury, racketeering, and fraud. Journalist Charles LeDuff once said Kilpatrick, quote, made 1,000 enemies in boots, unquote, meaning he made enemies of the firefighters, the police officers, and the city workers who kept Detroit running while he was tearing it apart from the inside. Kilpatrick called them lazy and overpaid. Harsh words from a mayor who would resign in disgrace and was later convicted of running a racketeering enterprise out of City Hall.
Burn.
Under his administration, the Detroit Fire Department hit rock bottom. Stations were permanently closed, trucks and apparatus broke down mid-response, and staffing was gutted. Kwame Kilpatrick didn't just betray Detroit, he monetized it. Contracts went to friends, cash went to cronies, and city credit cards covered the champagne. Firefighters were patching trucks with duct tape while the mayor's entourage rolled through town in taxpayer-funded navigators. Following Kilpatrick's downfall and the financial ruin left in his wake, Detroit became the largest U.S. city ever to declare bankruptcy with $18 billion in debt. Detroit didn't burn because people wanted to watch it burn. It burned because it had been hollowed out by greed, racism, and by neglect. The factories left, the people followed. The politicians fed at the carcass, while the citizens that remained and the firefighters tried their best to hold the line. In the years that followed, mayors like Dave Bing, emergency manager Kevin Orr, and current mayor Mike Dugan began the long and slow work of scraping the corruption off the walls of City Hall. And slowly, Detroit is rising from the ashes. The fire department is finally seeing increased funding and new equipment and better staffing, but there's still a long road ahead because the city's scars run deep, and healing from betrayal takes time and distance. Still, Detroit endures. The devil may not walk the streets with his own night anymore, but the city's fire problem isn't gone, it's just changed shape. Compare Detroit to Portland, Oregon. Both cities are nearly identical in population and size, roughly the same geographic footprint, with about one fire company for every 3.5 square miles. But Detroit handles nearly double the number of fire calls of Portland each year, on almost the same budget. Both departments operate on roughly $175 million a year, but Detroit's firefighters are still asked to do twice the work with the same resources. Underfunding remains one of the city's greatest challenges, and the shadows that once danced with the devil haven't vanished. They've just grown quieter. And still, When those shadows return, when someone lights an altar to the devil with matches and accelerant, Detroit's firefighters will still answer. So when someone tells you that Devil's Night was just an orgy of miscreants, a twisted poetry written in chaos and flame, you'll know the truth. It wasn't mischief that built the ritual pyre. It was evil in City Hall. It was racism and inequality. It was police brutality. And in the end, it was outrage that struck the match. And that's the truth of Devil's Night in Detroit, right here on Crime to Burn. I'm going to touch it.
You don't know where that's been. Maybe you don't know.
I didn't until just now.
I don't know, man. You always overcomplicate things.
This is why I would never commit a crime.
Allegedly.
Excuse me, sir. Did you leave your dermis? Dermis. That sounds like an insult. You dermis. Epithelial doesn't sound insulting. It sounds like a medical condition.
Yeah.
I've got the epithelials.
Oh, I hope you recover. Breathe more often. If you pace yourself with the breathing.
Does that feel better now?
I felt great the whole time.
Good. It'll be like that time I got home really late on Halloween, back when I was a single lady. And it was so late I didn't stop and get candy on the way home because I thought all of the good children would be home in bed by now. They chased my car up the driveway. And so I gave out cans of Mountain Dew because I didn't have any candy. Parents loved me.
That's not how noise works. Go order it off the Uline catalog since I'm never getting away from Uline. No matter how far I go, no matter where I move to, they find me.
Oral pharyngeal airways and the...
Nasal pharyngeal airways.
One of them needs lubrication, one of them doesn't.
You know which one's my favorite. Inside the box is just another box. I don't like your sock idea. Those aren't real hands. Yeah.
It's the time of year for Zyrtec and phlegm.
So just phlegm for me. I'll have phlegm, thank you. Double phlegm for me. With a side of phlegm. Sometimes I air drum to Def Leppard, and I catch myself doing it with both hands, and I feel like an asshole. You know, since it started working out down here, it sort of smells like a tire factory and cooking beefcake.
Why is it so hard to get in this chair?
I've never really had that much trouble.
I'm special.
You are. You should have a special helmet.
I don't really like wearing things on my head. My hair starts to hurt.
To the pool. Your hair hurts? But I don't think my hair has feelings. This episode was brought to you by Disobedient Kitties.
What have I done?
Sabotaged your editing evening.
That's why we had to start keeping the toilets closed. That's why potty training Zulu failed. She was great at it. She would go in the toilet, and then all I had to do was hit flush. But then she started viewing it as a playground of places to drop socks and try to fish them out. And had to choose. Did I want to scoop a cat box? Or did I want to fish wet socks out of a toilet?
You chose to do neither.
Actually, then I bought an automatic litter box that cleaned itself. And it flooded my house.
Well, that's a fun topic. Well,
okay.
What else dies?
Halloween. A time for clearing my throat. The phlegm is flowing. There was something else to fear. Something darker.
Gentrification.
Everybody needs a shot of bourbon. You'll hear some of the best creators in the genre coming... Did you just, fall asleep?
No, I was looking at something. The apples were born that way.
I don't believe it.
You're imagining the nutmeg, but that's okay.
I've got a vivid imagination.
Yeah, you do. Imagine me with a 10-inch wiener.
I don't have to. It's reality.
Well, yeah, because I measure from my asshole. Are you going to show them Little House on the Prairie? What are you going to do? You just pointed at something I can't see.
And how bad does the corruption...
That was an eruption.
And mutating.
I don't think you stretched it properly before engaging it.
The divide in the city was not subtle anymore. It was a gaping wound. Like my throat.
Your throat is a gaping wound. Oh my God, we're going to need that nasal pharyngeal. Bring in the cannula! I have a lot of respect for people that pronounce both T's and duct tape. Skeleton fingers assemble! The family that dresses up like weirdos stays weirdos together.
I don't think there was any chance that we weren't going to stay weirdos.
Don't matter how much grass you touch, you ain't getting less weird.
No, in fact, I'm allergic to grass, so I actually break out in hives if I touch too much of it. Well, she's an engineer, so she's doing...
I'm not, but I got a shovel. I'm an idiot with a shovel. Let's see what I can do. Don't you ever correct my French. Isn't that something? That's special.
I'm special.
You are. Well, maybe he grew since then and became more compassionate and empathetic.
He did grow, but he grew horizontally, not mentally.
Do not anger the neighborhood children. They are sugar-fueled and lawless. If you run out of candy, surrender your pantry. Steve accepts no liability for egg-related vengeance. Avoid store-bought costumes that come with everything you need. They never include emotional stability or enough Velcro. If you see a glowing figure at the end of the street, do not assume it's Steve. Steve glows internally. That's a stranger. Go inside. Pumpkin carving is a sacred act. If your jack-o'-lantern's face looks weird, that's not a failure. It's a manifestation. Name it. Feed it a Reese's. Respect it. This message has been sanctimoniously approved by Steve, who reminds you that true enlightenment can be achieved with full-size candy bars and good porch lighting.
We have a very sad fern.
They look like corn to me. Tried it with butter and everything changed. Happy Halloween, you sick freaks. From Crime to Burn.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hey BC3 crew, and listen, I know you're like, BC3 crew, but listen, yes, if you're here, that means you're part of the BC3 crew. I'm already claiming you. My name is Jasmine C.L. Prince, and I'm here to introduce you to my new true crime podcast, Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet. Now, I know what you're thinking, another true crime podcast, and I get it. Trust me, I do. But let me tell you why you need to be a part of the crew.
For real.
We're talking true crime, right? But with a twist. We're covering exclusive cases by Black men and women. And we're talking fraud, scams, and even murder, okay? Murder. And that's your typical gang and drug murders. No. We covering frauds, scams, influencer people just taking people's money for no reason. Y'all remember the PPP stuff? Yeah, we're covering that.
That's crazy.
So make sure you join me every Tuesday for Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet. Subscribe now and let's sip, stitch, and spill some true crime tea.